Graphs, including line plots. So today I want to start talking to you about different types of tables and charts. So one of the things that is used a lot to track information is called tally charts. It tracks data using tally marks. So here you can see part of a tally chart. I don't know why it's cut off, but it's what kind of chocolate is your favorite. And this obviously is from Britain because they use U's in their spelling. But we have dark, milk, and then white chocolate. Or sorry, milk, and then dark, and then white chocolate. And when you look at this graph here, you can see the tally marks here, which are made by 4 marks down and 1 going across, so that we know that it's 5 for every one. So if I was going to show that I counted this, I would just count above 5, 10, 15, 20, and then I would count 2. So there's 22 here. I would write that amount in the frequency. Now this is made by going around and asking everybody, taking a survey with this question, or some people might call it a poll. And you're asking people the question, what kind of chocolate is your favorite? And you give them the choice, milk, dark, or white. And so as people choose, you just kind of track it off using a tally mark. And then when you get to the end, you're counting up the total. So we can see 22 people prefer milk chocolate as their favorite, 5 people prefer dark chocolate, and 5, 10, 13 people prefer white chocolate. So then you take this information and you put it into what is called a graph. You could use a bar graph, you could use a pictograph, or you could use a line plot for it too. Most of the time people use a line plot when they're dealing with 2 sets of numbers, such as there are 20 students and we're measuring the heights of each. 4 students are 48 inches, 5 students are 50 inches, and so on. So you're using that for 2 sets of numbers, but you could use a line plot for this too. So here we have what's called a line plot, an example of one. This is about hours spent reading, if you look here. And so in this line plot, it uses a number line and it plots it. It uses X's or sometimes dots, or you might see stars, but it just uses the same form of something. So here you can see that these numbers here represent the hours spent reading. The X's represent one student. So you're going to pay attention to keys that they have here. So for instance, I know that 3 students spent 1 hour reading. 1 student spent 1 1/4 hour reading, which by the way is 1 hour 15 minutes. And then 2 students spent 1.5 hours. So I would just go along and I would count and show my work, show that I counted by writing the amounts above the X's. So this just shows data looking at that line plot. If I was going to ask how many more students read 2.5 hours than students that read 2 3/4 hours. So you will look at both of those values. I can see that 5 students read for 2.5 hours and only 2 read for 2 3/4. So if I'm looking for how many more, I want to find the difference between those two. How many more often does mean subtract. So we're going to take 5 minus 2, and we know that the answer is 3, but we also want to give a label of 3 students. If they ask us a question like that, we also always want to label what our answer is going to be. Then we have what's known as a bar graph. Bar graph has a few things on it that a line plot doesn't. To be honest, we first have the y-axis, the x-axis, and that's spelled like this, x-axis, y-axis. And then it has a title. So whatever your bar graph is about, you can see that title there. We're going to take a look back at a bar. So here I can see this bar graph. And the bar graph, of course, uses bars. It has a title. It has what's known as a scale. It has categories. It has bars. and spaces between the bars. If it doesn't have spaces and it kind of looks like this is a different type of graph called a histogram. Okay. Now, when I look at this information, again, I'm going to first show my work by writing the amount over each bar. So I know that 4 people chose comedy. Again, the numbers here stand for the people, and then here's the categories. I know that 4 people chose comedy as their favorite. 5, even though there's no number 5 written here, I know that 5 comes between 4 and 6. So I can make that assessment. And then 6 people chose romance, and then so on. I will continue to number 1 for drama, and then 4 here. Then I can answer questions like, the same amount of people chose comedy and sci-fi as their favorite types of movie, or 5 more people chose romance than drama, or 3 less people chose drama than sci-fi. And I'm doing all of that, again, any words like fewer, how many fewer, how many more, then I'm looking to subtract. But if I said something like, how many people chose action and romance, then we would want to combine or put it together. Then we are adding, we would want to add how many people chose romance plus how many chose action. So 11 people chose action and romance. So the last type of graph we're dealing with is a pictograph, and it's kind of easy to remember because it uses pictures, so it kind of sounds similar, or symbols to show the data. It's one of the graphs that uses keys most frequently. Not this kind of key to get into the house. I just drew that picture so you can see it more. So we're going to take a look at a pictograph. So if we look at this pictograph here, we can see the title is the same as bar graph. It's about apples sold. We can see that they have their categories here in months. So it's a sideways one, and it's okay to have that. Their categories are months. And then we have the pictures going horizontal as opposed to vertical. But you could draw the very same thing and have your months down here at the bottom, and then have pictures of your apples going vertical. So you can have the apples going this way too. But in this case, they have it going a different way, which is good for you to see. Now, as I said, pictographs often use keys, and you have to pay attention or you will miscount what is going on. So when we look at this, we see a picture of an apple, but it's not just representing one apple, it is representing 10 apples. And if we see a half an apple, we know that it's talking about 5 apples. So again, going through to show my work for this graph, I'm going to write 10. This one picture represents 10 apples. So I'm going to count by 10 every time I see a full apple. So 10, 20, 30, 40. So this one represents 40. This is 10, 20, and 5, which represents 25. And then this represents 20. I'll put my 2 there. And so I can, again, look at it and make assessments based on what I see, or evaluate it or analyze this graph based on what I see. I can see that more people chose sold apples in February than in March. And if I want to know how many more, then I'm going to subtract 40 minus 25. And then I know that my answer is 15 more apples. That could also be phrased as how many fewer apples sold in March than in February, and so on. I know that they sold the least amount of apples in the month of January. You can come up with all kinds of facts, but that is graphs.